Good morning. I'm Reverend Paul Beckel. Welcome to the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship. Those of you online and those of you here in person. If you are here for the first time or if you are part of the 10th generation of Unitarian Universalist continuity, you are equally welcome. Either way, you might find useful a series of classes that begin today after the service on our UU principles and how, in your own life, you would interpret them, and in your own voice, you would articulate them as we live them out in the context of this congregation. It's a series of classes, six classes over the next 6 Sundays from noon to 1:30. And if you haven't signed up, please see me right after this service, and I'll show you the secret elbow bump that'll get you in the door. But first, find your place at Buff right after the service during coffee hour, which I hope you'll stay for. Online on Zoom, we also have a virtual coffee hour. If you're here in person, there are 20-some tables set up downstairs by the various entities within the congregation that make things happen in front of the scenes and especially behind the scenes, and invitations from all of them to say that you can be part of the good work that makes us flow. You can find out more about all of that and get today's order of service on buff.org. The order of service is in the green box in the upper right-hand corner, and you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter there on buff.org. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Carrie Kenline. I'm a longtime member of this fellowship, and today is Find Your Place at Buff, and a couple lovely places I found for myself at Buff are here in the choir and also on the celebrant team. In the service today, we're talking about beloved community, and Reverend Paul will be using the image of a nurse log as our inspiration. And if you don't know, a nurse log is a fallen tree out of which little trees start to grow. So in the anticipation of this message, I found myself thinking about how grateful I am to trees. And I ended up writing a poem of praise, which I'll offer this morning as our chalice lighting. A thank you to trees. We bow to you in gratitude. It would have been enough if you had just decorated our world with your graceful trunks and branches, just shown us how many ways there are to be beautiful, just given us a solid place to lean our backs against, and shared your fruits and nuts and dappled green shade and fluttering leaf music. But you are also patient professors, the non-lecturing kind. Thank you for showing us century after century how to bend without breaking, reach high and deep, extend tendrils of connection to give and receive in perfect balance, how to let go and let go and let go each season, and then finally, how to become fertile ground for new possibilities. As we light our chalice this morning, may we bow in gratitude to the trees. May we open to their wisdom, and may we deepen in the art of being beloved community.
As Haven lights the chalice, you might want to look at your order of service before we read our covenant, which we'll read today in Spanish. El amor es el espíritu de esta comunidad y el servicio la de vida, celebrando nuestra diversidad y unidos por la búsqueda de la verdad. Trabajamos por la paz y honramos a toda la creación. Esta es nuestra promesa.
Please rise now in body or spirit and join us in singing the Rainforest Song, which we want to have a little short look at before we launch into it totally. It builds the rainforest through the various levels, starting with the understory. And if you look at the lyrics, which are in your program there, and if I could have an F sharp, we'll sing to you the sound of the understory. Understory, the understory, the understory, the understory. And above that is the ground level, on the ground level, on the ground level, on the ground level. And above that is the canopy, and coming out of that is emergent. So all four levels build together. Listen to how they fill in. We'll do one time through add 2, add 3, add 4. Understory, the next 2. Ground level. On the ground level, here goes the canopy. On the ground level, canopy, ground level, canopy, emergent canopy, canopy. So it's a rainforest of sound. We'll sing it all together, starting with verse 1. The choir will now sing an anthem that I wrote to the words attributed to Chief Seattle, "We are a part of the earth, the children of the earth."
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna, and I have the honor of addressing the young people in the congregation, and hopefully the rest of you as well. So I'm curious, how many of you know someone who is deaf, who cannot speak? Some of us, maybe none of the young people. So deaf means, if we're totally deaf, our ears don't work at all, so we can't hear other people talking. And how do they communicate? Well, if their eyes work, they use sign language. So we're going to learn a song this morning with sign language, and we'll learn it first with the words. Sign language is different in every country, just as spoken language is. So in our country, we use American Sign Language. So these signs are what's called ASL, American Sign Language. So I will sing it one time through with the signs. Unfortunately, the words in the bulletin are a little bit incorrect, and it's a very simple song, so you probably don't need to look at the order of service. I'll sing it one time through with the signs, and then I'll teach you the signs. So it goes like this. We are all the waves of one sea. We are all the leaves of one tree. You're welcome to do it. The time has come to live as one. We are all the flowers of one garden, and the leaves of one tree, and the waves of one sea. As you can tell, in American Sign Language, we don't sign every word. We just sign the gist of it. So we'll sing it 3 times through with voices as well, and the signs. And then the 4th time through, we'll do it in silence, only with the signs. And I invite you to just use your arms and your hands and not worry about if it's correct or not. No one's trying to understand you, so enjoy it. And at the very end, if you feel like celebrating, we'll do it in silence, like that. We are all the waves of one sea. We are all the leaves of one tree. I realize I forgot to teach you the signs. Many of them are self-explanatory. We are all, you can use either hand all the time, it doesn't make any difference. The waves is to the front, and the sea is to either side. We are all the leaves. So in sign language, if I put my hand here, that means you're looking at what's above it. So this is a leaf fluttering of one tree. So if I put my hand here, you're looking at the whole tree of one tree. The time, we put our thumb against our palm and make a clock. The time has come. We start with our hands away from our torso and move towards us. This is an L in American Sign Language, and we do it up our torso. To live as one. I can't make a circle because of the mic. We are all the flowers. We're smelling the flowers. Don't do it under your chin or it's vomit. So right next to our noses, the flowers of one garden. And you can make the garden any shape you want, any size you want, a circle, triangle, doesn't matter, of one garden. And then you just back up, and the leaves of one tree, and the waves of one sea. 3 times through with voices. We are all the waves of one sea. We are all the leaves of one tree. The time has come to live as one. We are all the flowers of one garden, and the leaves of one tree, and the waves of one sea. We are all the waves of one sea. We are all the leaves of one tree. The time has come to live as one. We are all the flowers of one garden, and the leaves of one tree, and the waves of one sea. One more time with voice. We are all the waves of one sea. We are all the leaves of one tree. The time has come to live as one. We are all the flowers of one garden and the leaves of one tree and the waves of one sea.
As the children go off to their classrooms, let's sing From You I Receive. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Good morning. Can you hear me? I'm Beth Brownfield from the Social Justice and Environmental Committee, the Native American Connections. And I didn't know when I signed up for this weekend to speak to you that tomorrow is Indigenous Peoples' Day. I'm wearing red. I went to a powwow last night at Lummi, and this is for missing and murdered Indigenous men and women, thousands of them. I notice that the choir is wearing orange, and orange right now is a signal of those who were in boarding schools. Do you believe in synchronicity? Yes. Also, Kevin's anthem to Chief Seattle and the Rainforest Song, the Indigenous peoples are protecting our rainforests. So there you have it. And we are living on stolen land. At the age of 12, I read about smallpox blankets. I was in my 6th grade classroom with one of those wooden desks with the ink place for ink and the lift up with the iron sides. And I read a paragraph that I can see, I don't know if it's the one that was really the one that I saw, but it's in my imagination, about smallpox blankets that were given to Indigenous peoples that were captured to kill them. I could not believe at the age of 12 that any human being could do something like that to another person. And I thought it was because we didn't know better and it would never happen again. I had no one, it opened my heart, it broke my heart in that moment when I read that, and I can hardly even tell about it without crying. And I had no one to talk to. My mother had died the year before. There were no teachers that would even have reacted to my pain. And so a seed was planted on that day. And at the age of 12, it's when it was planted. And it led me to over 46 years of activism with Original Nations and Peoples. But it was at a 1974 Quaker summer camp that I was invited to. I was a Unitarian, but I went to the Quaker summer camp. And I learned about the takeover of Wounded Knee and the complicity of our government and the culture and history of treaties and sovereignty and traditional and original peoples' culture and commitments. The seed that was planted at the age of 12 took root and led to these 46 years of activism. I moved to Bellingham in 2004, and I had been working in Minnesota with Native tribes with the American Friends Service Committee, and then also with an organization called Honor Our Neighbors' Origins and Rights, of which I was invited to be the director of that program for 2 years before I left Minnesota. So when I came to Bellingham, I wanted to continue some of the work I had done in facilitating some classes for people to learn about honoring treaties, sovereignty, honoring nature and cultures. And so I couldn't just start a class, but I went out to Lummi and asked permission from Daryl Hilaire, who was a tribal chair, for permission to facilitate a class with Indigenous speakers from Lummi or Nooksack or wherever. And I also went to Nooksack and talked with George Adams, who was the cultural chair out there, for permission to do that and to also give me recommendations. So that's the way I began to meet many people from Northwest Indian College, from Lummi Nation, from Nooksack, and other tribal nations. Buff's Native American Connections Committee was founded around 2006 when Lummi was planning to host 100,000 people for a week at Lummi for the canoe journey that was happening that year. And they were going to feed them, they were going to find, camping space and showers and all of that. So we met with Smitty Hilaire to ask them if he needed any help with money, volunteers, and resources, and he said everything. He had 5 people at Lummi that supported this idea of hosting this many people. So I was new here, I had no money or anything else, and I no committee, nothing, and so I had talked to Tim Douglas, who was mayor of Bellingham, if we could honor Lummi for doing this. And he said, well, go to the park system and you can have Boulevard Park to do an honoring. Well, we found out that they had never been officially acknowledged as the first inhabitants of these lands and waters. Never had anyone said, you are the first peoples here. And so we developed a resolution or a proclamation. It was signed by all the mayors and the county executive, given by the city council, county council, letters from the governor all the way down. The U.S. and state senators and representatives and politicians were there or sent letters. And then from Buff, we started a community connection committee with Buff members and other people from the community, like 10 people who raised $80,000 in 2007 to give to Lummi Nation, provided hundreds of volunteers and services, and it broke the ice between Lummi Nation and other tribes with our county. And it has not changed. It has been growing since that time. So we also, we hosted the official acknowledgement, and so this was earth-shaking for non-Indians and Lummi Nation and indigenous peoples. And between 2007 and 2013, Buff initiated a discussion of the doctrine of discovery of repudiating that through individual congregations, and then through, in 2013, it led to the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery at a General Assembly. So again, in 2019, we coordinated another Community Connections Committee for the second hosting of the canoe journey, and we raised $111,000 to give Lummi, and again provided hundreds of volunteers and other services. In 2013, activists wanted to work with Lummi on the coal terminal. They didn't know who to contact. We found out that the Sovereignty and Treaty Protection Office was doing that work, and they wanted to talk to religious leaders and ask if we could find those religious leaders. Deb Cruz and I researched, we found 86 different religious organizations, congregations, and different organizations. And we said, you have to speak to the activists. They're the ones who really want to work with you. We found 55. And on Memorial Day in 2013, we had close to 400 people in this sanctuary. In the morning with the religious leaders, in the afternoon, in the evening with the activists. We had 44 organizations that were represented statewide and countywide. And so Lummi was given the leadership of the fight against the coal terminal, which they won with their treaties. Here at Buff, we can talk about our indigenous neighbors and original nations, but the very best thing you can do is be with them when that's available. It's not about reciting that their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, and waterways, so it's good to remember that this is their land that was stolen from them and that we benefit every day. The best thing you can do is participate. Last night I went to the powwow, and I felt like crying because there were 2 people there from Buff. And that was the most rare opportunity to be with people. It's like going to a rodeo because it was a contest of dancers. It wasn't anything scary or cultural or anything at Lummi that could interfere with any of your lives. It was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So today at Find Your Place at Buff, which I didn't realize was going to be today, I invite you to come down and talk with me and Deb Cruz to find a place to support original nations and people out in the world by stepping out of learning, reading, discussing the intellectual approach and enter the world from their experience. Deb is doing an unbelievable job of networking with activism here at Buff and in the state and nationally with Unitarian Universalists. So you can go to Totem Pole Sendosh, the powwow last night, the Vine Deloria Symposium, Indigenous Peoples Day, which is tomorrow, and I have information about that. Totem Pole Journeys, the Lightcatcher permanent exhibit of Coast Salish people, movies, documentaries, speakers that come through Buff. And so the handout will tell you tomorrow that Whatcom Community College is putting on Indigenous Peoples Day with a free salmon dinner at 4:30, followed by a screening of Daughters of a Lost Bird. A lost bird is a child that's adopted out of their culture. And that will happen tomorrow between 4:30 and 8. And then you can sign up about information about Native American Connections Committee. And you can take home of our land acknowledgement that we read on Sunday mornings. And some other handouts, all the information about a course that's going to happen. And also, if I ask you how many federally recognized tribes are there, 29. And I imagine most of you can maybe mention 5 out of the 29, but these are nations within our state, indigenous nations. So I will tell you from experience, your life will never be the same when you experience the lives and worldviews of original nations and people from their perspective. It is transforming, and this opportunity is at our doorstep. Your life will never be the same. So please join me downstairs afterwards for Find Your Place at Buff. And I hope you find your place with the Native American Connections. We don't have meetings. We just let you know what's happening and invite you to participate in whatever way that shows up. Thank you.
First, I want to give you a heads up. For the last few months, I've been finding myself getting choked up over just the littlest things. So whenever there's music that moves me, or stories or real issues about people being harmed or people being loved, it's going to get to me, and I just want you to know that we can handle it if I need to stop for a minute. And often, just by saying it, it makes sure it doesn't happen. So, in 1979, when the regime of Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza was overthrown, and the Sandinista government took its place, the Jesuit priest Fernando Cardinal was appointed to the position of Minister of Education in the new socialist administration. His brother, Father Ernesto Cardinal, became the Minister of Culture. After a few warnings about their involvement in politics, and specifically their support for a Marxist government, the two were suspended from their priestly duties by Pope John Paul II. This had no effect on their religious faith or their political convictions, because for them there was no contradiction between their commitment to Christianity and their devotion to the service of the poor of Nicaragua within the revolutionary process. What enabled Fernando and Ernesto Cardinal to sustain the courage of their convictions through all of this tumult and ongoing threats to their lives? They understood Christianity and interpreted Christian scripture through the lens of liberation theology, which I will need to describe very succinctly. Liberation theology is based in the understanding that the message of the Bible is fundamentally a message of liberation for the oppressed. The Hebrew and Christian scriptures are at their very core about liberation for the oppressed, written for the oppressed and therefore best interpreted by the oppressed. It is an anti-imperialist theology, recognizing that the central narrative of Hebrew scripture is the liberation of the Jewish people who had been held as slaves by Pharaoh, a narrative reaffirmed repeatedly and made pertinent today through commandments such as this in the book of Exodus: "You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you too were an alien." Liberation theology takes the same approach to interpreting Christian scripture, which has to be understood primarily as Jesus' critique of institutionalized oppression. At one level by the Roman occupiers of Palestine, and more immediately by the local religious leaders who held on to their power by colluding with the Romans to extort the poor. Liberation theology, no surprise, is a liberal religious tradition, one which recognizes that revelation is not sealed, but rather God's message to humankind goes on and is to be read through our human experience, not just ancient scripture, through our challenges and our learning from these challenges, and through our efforts to establish a heaven on earth, a community of equality and mutual compassion, not just in theory but in practice. The Unitarian Universalist translation of the concept that revelation is not sealed is not necessarily, can be, but not necessarily about revelation from a divine external source. We affirm many sources of our living tradition, all of which continue to unfold, such as direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which removes us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. The words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by, of course, loving our neighbors as ourselves. And humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And finally, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. That is, truth is not written in stone long ago, but is alive and emerging even as we live into it. This morning, we read our covenant in Spanish. The version we read is by no means definitive, but then there can be no definitive version because the revelation through which we become beloved community is a process. So who is best suited to interpret this, our equivalent of Holy Scripture? Within our tradition, we're adamant that the translation of Scripture in one era is not adequate for the next era. So one way not to pick a translation would be to plug the English words into Google Translate and then accept whatever comes out. Another inadequate approach would be to have me choose, given that I have very little experience of the language. So then would it be okay to use a translation made by a Spanish language professional whose first language is not Spanish? Or would we get a more appropriate translation from a native speaker or a committee of native speakers? Or does a UU congregational covenant need to be translated by Unitarian Universalists? And what if there are no Spanish-speaking people in that congregation of Unitarian Universalists? The question is more complicated still and richer because this covenant statement exists nowhere but here at Buff. This is our covenant, created by this congregation for this congregation some years ago. And of course, that congregation no longer exists. Putting all that aside for a minute, though, I'd like to point out a tiny example of the riches that can arise from engaging with this process with a consciousness of our diversity and the benefit that can come from having different insights into who we are and even to how we articulate who we are. Just look at one last word, the last word in Spanish on that covenant. There are at least three words in Spanish that could be translated from covenant. Each of them contains different connotations in English and probably still more connotations in Spanish. Each of the connotations can remind us about who we are and what it means to be in community. One translation to covenant is pacto. Esto es nuestro pacto, kind of like an agreement, a pact of mutual protection. Esto es nuestro voto, implying that this comes about only through democratic means. Esta es nuestra promesa, implying the promise, implying not only that this is a statement of heart and commitment, but also it's a look into our future, our promise, what we are capable of. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about empathy, how our empathy for one another is our natural state because we are all connected. At the same time, though, blocking out empathy is also natural. It's a reaction to threat and loss, and it's what humans do in the face of threat and loss. Now, if this is the case for us as individuals, how might it apply to our families and our congregations and our wider community? Today, let's consider the lessons of the forest, the majestic trees and the fungus devouring them, the soil and the microorganisms digesting it into nutrients absorbable by new roots, the ants and the birds and the bears who tear into fallen timber, and the warmth stored within those logs, within which young mammals cuddle, and the ongoing exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, much of the latter being sequestered through this process down into the ground where it will not contribute to excess warming of the atmosphere. What might we learn from this miraculous process about empathy and community and about ourselves, this community, how we are inextricable from this miracle? Sadly, this regenerative process of the forest, there's no guarantee that it will continue unbroken. All too many invaders interrupt, and I'm not talking about animal or microorganism invaders who contribute. I'm talking about pollution or the extraction of resources from the forest or authoritarian decisions about who has access to and control over the forest. Unitarianism and Universalism have oscillated over the centuries, sometimes insisting upon individual religious freedom with the conviction that if each of us grew into our own independent ways of thinking, we could be as great trees growing strong, each in our own way. This vision alternating with the sense that we are an interdependent community of great trees and small trees, stronger when we are standing together. But then a few weeks ago, I began reading this book, Tragic Investment, How Race Sabotages Communities and Jeopardizes America's Future and What We Can Do About it. It's by local author James Addington, and James, along with our own Mel Hoover, will be engaging in dialogue around the book during next Sunday's service, and then inviting us all to a 5-session book study, which is going to go from noon till 1:30 on the subsequent 5 Sundays. So, just to be clear about that, today we're doing the Intro to UU for 5 Sundays, and then this will overlap. You know, it's like overlapping cycles of beauty and magic. I gained a number of insights from this book, but what jumped out at me most profoundly was simply the caption beneath a drawing of a log on a forest floor. Young trees grow up from the heart of the log in the drawing, as do ferns, and the tree stump nearby is similarly loaded with new growth. The caption reads, "Beloved community is like a nurse log." What the simple caption could not capture was the thriving ecosystem around that log, the vital pathways repeatedly dug by beetles and swiped away by raccoons, the tiny meandering roots of microflora and the seeds of nascent giants which themselves one day would fall. And above all, the process, the ongoing and overlapping cycles of respiration and rot and nourishing and being nourished. Rather than the image of a strong, independent trees, or even the image of a forest united in its diversity, I wonder if this richer image, this dynamic vision, may be more appropriate for the Unitarian Universalism we seek in the 21st century. Not just a forest, but a community inextricable from its setting, adapting to changing conditions and constantly regenerating. The caption probably stuck to me as well because I've been looking at the book of Ecclesiastes in Hebrew scripture. The overall message of Ecclesiastes is that nothing lasts, and that's okay. Expecting anything to last is a vain illusion, for everything we do will ultimately be not for us, but for the generation to come. One line in the book reads, "Surely the fate of human beings is like that of animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. Humans and animals all have the same breath. All come from ashes, and to ashes all return." And then one phrase in particular, this one, "Whether a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place it falls, there it will lie." Which brings me back to my sermon last week, in which I invited you to consider how our common purpose as a congregation may be evolving. But however it's evolving, it can't be something that we're not able to just make it up out of our grandest ideals. Wherever the tree of buff has fallen, it's these conditions within which we have to discover our promise. Finally, to close, I will give a liberation theology interpretation of one little piece of Jesus carrying his cross toward his execution. As he was going along and stumbling and unable at some point to even carry it anymore, there was this farmer coming along. This is not a story I'm making up or some later interpretation. In the Gospels, a farmer comes along. His name is Simon of Cyrene. The Roman guards grab him and say, "You carry it." And so this common farmer, the lowest of people in his days, along with this common carpenter, Jesus, among the other lower people of his days. I know today there's rich farmers and rich carpenters, and very poor farmers and very poor carpenters. But in that era, they were the lowly, and certainly both Jesus and Simon were. So on the one hand, this was agonizing and humiliating for Simon of Cyrene. And yet he knew about Jesus as a rebel wanting to change the way things were in that world and how people like him changed the way people like him were being treated. I say this as an introduction to our speaker today, who will tell us about Tierra y Libertad, the Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad, which, as I understand it, is an on-the-ground, here and now organization that wants to break the grip of big agriculture and find a way for people who have been oppressed to live into their own power. Let's support that vision. And I would like to invite Sasha Fishel Freeman to tell us more.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much, Reverend Paul, for that introduction, and thank you all to everyone for the opportunity to be here today and to speak to you all. A special thank you to Naomi for being so welcoming this morning, and Kara for coordinating this, and the whole committee for the opportunity to do this justice collection this morning for Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad. My name is Sasha Fishel, and I work for Community to Community Development. I'm the Cooperative Development Coordinator for C2C, but I'm here today representing the farm worker owners of Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad. And I have to say that I really appreciated being part of the ceremony today. I thought it was really beautiful. I was thinking kind of about the different themes that I was listening to and hearing in the ceremony, right? The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. Liberation for poor and oppressed people. And it seems to me like there's so much overlap between some of those themes and the work that the farm workers at Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad are doing, right? Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad is a agriculture cooperative in Everson. It's was founded by a group of farm workers who had extensive experience working in agriculture and experiencing intense exploitation year after year, right? Doing backbreaking work for poverty wages. The idea for the co-op came out of a labor struggle in which farm workers were demanding better conditions, fair pay, and fair treatment for themselves. And one of the demands that they had at the time was that they wanted ownership, right, over their labor, over the land that they worked, and the land that they lived on, right, and their housing. And so that is how the co-op was born. They started out producing berries and have since moved to producing food produce that is culturally relevant to farm worker communities here in Whatcom and Skagit counties, right? And so they're producing nopales, which is it's like a cactus leaf that is eaten a lot traditionally by folks from southern Mexico, chilacayotes, which is a kind of squash. They're also producing tomatoes, which is going a lot to the Bellingham School District. And they're continuing to produce berries, raspberries, and blueberries. And we were here a couple months ago during blueberry season, and I think a lot of you bought blueberries, so I hope you enjoyed them. I think that the work of the co-op is so important for so many reasons, right? Number one, that they're producing, the majority of farm workers in our region are indigenous people from Mexico and Guatemala, right? They come from communities who are very rural and have been practicing regenerative and organic agriculture for thousands of years, right? I mean, they're the original experts on how to produce food in ways that don't exploit people and the planet. So often in big agriculture, they're not able to put that knowledge and that expertise into practice because big agriculture is so focused on maximizing profit at any cost, right? But the co-op, they formed the co-op as a way to produce food in ways that are good for the planet, that don't use pesticides and toxics and chemicals, that don't poison the planet and that don't poison them and their families. And 5 years later, that's what they're doing, right? And over the last 5 years, it's been an intense amount of sweat and labor to build the 65 acres of land that they farm out in Everson and to develop it and to build irrigation and plant crops and build greenhouses and chicken coops and housing for animals. And that process is continuing, right? And so right now what the co-op is trying to do is they're trying to get organic certification. They've been farming in organic ways for the last 5 years. They know what they're doing. They're, like I said before, they're experts on how to farm organically, because they've been doing it in their communities for millennia. But that knowledge is oftentimes not recognized because the process for getting organic certification is complicated and long and expensive too, very expensive. And so I think that is what the co-op is asking for support with today from the congregation is to get that organic certification. And again, I think we're all really grateful for the opportunity to present here today, to be with you. I know I'll be downstairs a little bit later on, having conversations, and I look forward to it. And thanks all so much for your support.
Thank you, Sasha, and thank you in advance to this generous congregation, which has supported so many organizations to enrich and bring justice to our larger community. Today, any cash you put in the baskets will go to La Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad. Any check you put in there made out to Buff will go to the same place. So make any check out to Buff. If you do specifically want to have your contribution go to Buff as part of your pledge, please write that in the memo line at the back, on the bottom of your check. So please give generously. Thank you, Melanie. And now let's close by joining together in hymn number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. Number 163, which is in the gray hymnal.
may we keep growing in our wisdom of what it means to be beloved community and in relationship with each other and this earth. Now let's please join together and sing our closing song, Circle Round for Freedom.